Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. And as in our previous video, we have already discussed about the general overview regarding the anatomy and physiology of human digestive system. So in this video, we will be discussing about the general mechanism involved in the gastric secretion. Further next, we will be talking about the major factors which regulate the gastric secretion. So the topic belongs to the human anatomy and physiology of b.pharm second semester first year. Right, so without delaying, let's talk about the general procedure. Yes, so as we know, stomach is the place where the secretion goes on. So let's learn about the major physiology and morphology of human stomach. So this J-shaped organ is placed obliquely behind the diaphragm, which is differentiated in three major parts. So first part is known as cardia, other is fundus, and the last one is pyrolus. So sorry, I must repeat, it is fundus, cardia and pyrolus. So fundus is the place where the food is temporarily stored and left over around for 1 to 2 hours. Body is the place where the glandular epithelium lies and are responsible for the secretion of large quantity of acids. So human stomach also regulate a function known as hemopoietic function, and I will let you know how this continues. The productive function is one just due to the secretion known as mucus, which protects the gastric mucosa from being ulcerated or any other kind of damage. Other important function of HCl is the activation of pepsinogen, which is further responsible for the digestion of and absorption of proteins. So here is the general view, a general morphology of how is the general assembly of various layers in the stomach. So the outermost layer is serosa, the muscularis, submucosa and mucosa. So mucosa is the region or the layer which is responsible for various secretion. So this epithelial layer constitutes of large number of cells. Some of them are like enteroendocrine cells, chief cells, which are also called the peptic cells, the parietal cells and mucous neck cells. Moving next, let's talk about the various secretory function of the cells in the gastric glands. So if you zoom in, you will find there are large number of cells, like as in the last slide we have discussed about the mucous neck cells, parietal cells, enterochromaffin-like cells, chief cells, D cells called delta cells, G cells. So each of them have their respective functions. Mucous cells for the secretion of mucus, which protects the lining, the parietal cell for gastric secretion, and also the intrinsic factor. So this intrinsic factor is responsible for the absorption of vitamin B12, which is representing the hemopoietic function, right? As you know well that this vitamin B12 is responsible for protecting us from anemia, right? Enterochromaffin-like cells are one which stimulate the histamine release. Chief cells for pepsinogen, for protein digestion. D cells are the somatostatins and gastrin as well. So they are the last two cells are known as the inhibitory cells. So moving next, let's discuss about the functions of these cells. So the neck cells, here are the neck cells responsible for the secretion of mucus, which is the protective action of the stomach. So this is how it looks like, the microvillus structure, the secretory vesicles which temporarily stores mucus in them. Moving next, other cells are like chief cells or the peptic cells, which secrete the large amount of pepsinogen. Other are the parietal cells and the cell of interest, which actually secrete the hydrochloric acid and intrinsic. So let's focus more on parietal cells. Here we will learn about the general mechanisms of acid secretion. So when we intake food on parasympathetic stimulation, the parietal cells generally secrete around 160 millimole per liter of hydrochloric acid, which is extremely acidic condition, right? The pH of this acid is around 0.8, and in normality, if you say, it's around 0.1 normal solution. So parietal cells generally contain this branching structure or this finger-like projections, which in hand increase the large surface area, which improves the secretion capability. So moving next, let's zoom in to the another. So now this hydrogen and fluoride ion constitute together to form a hydrochloric acid. And yes, there are some voltage-gated potassium channels as well to maintain out the potassium and sodium balance. So this bicarbonate ion is responsible for the post-alkaline tide, which is seen basically after meals. So this was a general mechanism involving the secretion of gastric acid inside the lumen. Further next, we will. So the gastric acid depends on the acetylcholine coming out by the parasympathetic stimulation of the M1 receptor of the enteric nervous system, which is also known as the rest and digest system. So they secrete acetylcholine as a neurotransmitter. Other than there are certain hormonal inputs as well, like gastrin and histamine, which also leads to the gastric secretion, right? So whenever there is a parasympathetic stimulation, so the impulse comes to the amylin receptor. There is the release of acetylcholine, which further binds to the amylin receptor. So on binding, it increases the calcium entry, which further constitute the opening of this hydrogen potassium ATPase pump. As soon as the potassium this pump activates, there is the exchange of certain protons inside the luminal membrane and chloride ion inside the luminal membrane, whereas the bicarbonate ions to the blood vessels, which further maintains the acidity as well as basicity of the system. So the gastric activation is basically carried out by histamine, acetylcholine, gastrin, whereas the decrease in the gastric acid is generally monitored by the delta cells, which secrete out the somatostatin, the prostaglandins from PGE2, which are the PGE2 enhancers, right? Other are like certain things like VIP, GIP, CCK, glucagon, and some other factors as well. Moving next, let's talk about certain phases which are generally seen in the gastric acid secretion. So whenever you see some food inside outside, so whenever your eyes analyze, they see or any sight, smell, taste, or even the thought of the food, they constitute a phase known as cephalic phase, which is modulated by vagus nerve. So during this phase, there is a least amount of acid secretion may be seen inside your body. Second one, or the most important phase, is the gastric phase, which is regulated by the local nervous or the secretory reflexes via gastrin or histamine mediated secretion. So this phase is one which has the highest number or the largest secretion of the gastric acid in this phase. Last one is the intestinal phase, which is monitored by the nervous and the hormonal reflexes. So this is also a phase where after secretion means when the food is in the intestine, so whenever there is certain secretion seen in the human body. So this was about about the mechanism and the regulation of gastric acid inside the human body. So thank you for watching, and don't forget to hit on the like button, do share, do subscribe, and please do not forget to give your precious feedback, which really motivate us along to create such videos. Thank you.